Thank you. So I will just get started by very briefly introducing myself. My name is Fred Cruz Nowell, and I am one of the Joan Tisch Teaching Fellows at the Whitney. I'm also a PhD candidate in musicology at Cornell University. And currently, I'm writing a dissertation project about occult music doctrines in 20th century modern art. But today I'm going to discuss the work of 5 artists in the Whitney Biennial on view now, titled Even Better Than the Real Thing. And these are artists who engage with instruments or the history and politics of sense perception, including Dion Lee, Julia Phillips, Constantina Zavitsanos, Nikita Gale, and the collective People Who Stutter Create. And then there'll be some time at the end for a little Q&A. So just to get right into it, Julia Phillips is born in Hamburg in 1985 and now lives and works in Chicago and Berlin. She is currently an assistant professor of visual arts at the University of Chicago. Her practice focuses on sculpture and installation, as well as video and works on paper. Her individual sculptures and suites of sculpture convey a mix of modern sleekness, tension, and occasionally a hint of eroticism, incorporating harnesses, straps, innuendo, and polished functional hardware. Here are examples from different series of sculptures titled Intruder Misused 2, Muter, Protector, and Archer. One distinctive aspect of Julia's practice is that she often begins by selecting a title first, which underscores the importance of words in her projects and conceptual thinking. Some titles from her actual works include Objectifier, Manipulator, Exoticizer, Blinder, Negotiator, Operator, Penetrator, Drainer, Stabilizer, Witness, Oppressor, Suppressor, Observer, Observed, Positioner, Impregnator, Fixator, and Tuner. All of these words point to kinds of relations and relationships, which is a major theme across Julia's practice. As this non-exhaustive list highlights, she is particularly interested in words that can be used to describe relationships existing on an interpersonal or intimate level, and also those words that translate meaningfully to a larger structural and political context. Often, her sculptures focus on interactions between 2 parties, and she will use glazed ceramic casts to include or infer the presence of 2 bodies in relation to each other. The works in this slide, titled Positioner on the left and Distancer on the right, both use partial casts of faces. The work on the left has a cast of the lower half of a face positioned with an open mouth, and the one on the right shows 2 partial casts of 2 faces. The faces are both lying on the side of the metal table, connected at the bridge of the nose with metal hardware. Both of these works differently illustrate what Julia calls a doer done to situation, a concept that comes from psychoanalysis that describes a dynamic where one person acts as the doer and the other acts as the done to. This interest in 2 elements coming together, relating and connecting, is continued in one of the 2 sculptures that Julia has in the Biennial, titled Mediator. So what you're looking at here are two ceramic chest collarbone casts that are slightly angled towards one another as if leaning into a confrontation. And there is a cast of a microphone mesh at the center. The center pole holds the cast of the mesh, which looks like it could be a functional mic, especially in person, but it's not functional. Julia does have works with functional mics, but not this one. She talks about mediator and considers it to be part of a suite of works about terms like negotiation and mediation, which highlight themes of interaction and resolution. When discussing her intentions behind mediator and the other works along this project, Julia says that I wanted to create a shift in tone from previous works that were dealing with violence and depression and physical force. In this show, I wanted to complicate a portrayal of subject-object relationships, with some works still showing a doer-done-to dynamic, while others would include a third party or implied actions of reconciliation. So part of the intention with mediator is to represent difference and a dialogue that happens when a third party gets involved. And the piece describes a relationship, including a third person. The mediating position of that middle person is mimicked here by the two horizontal rods as a gesture of standing between two opponents held apart at the chest by two arm lengths, like stiff-armed. In a talk at the Art Institute of Chicago, where Julia discussed this work among others, she let the audience in that these images of wrestlers were her reference images for two people having a confrontation around a circular center. The position of the mediator is also represented by the ceramic cast of the microphone. And here she's revisiting the microphone as a symbol. And Julia has explained that what she really finds interesting about that mesh structure is that it represents absorption of information, but also amplification. And that is exactly what is needed in successful mediation: the ability to absorb and hear one another, but also really amplify the point. Like the mediator, the opposing casts incorporate the idea of balance physically, but here also socially, represented by a dark and a light complexion facing each other, accounting for different histories and experiences. Speaking about the tonality of the ceramic casts, Julia also said that while the sculpture can easily be read as a dialogue between a Black subject and a white subject, I try to confront viewers with the notion of skin complexion that goes beyond race and ethnicity. The notion of colorism accounts for the complexities and power dynamics embedded in our skin tone and how our complexion can affect our identity and subjectivity. So the ceramic elements, which are glazed to be very corporeal, intend to point to colorism and embodies complexion as an identity marker that is not necessarily tied to one's ethnicity, while having power dynamics embedded in it. Now, the next work I want to discuss also thinks about the body and the presence of the body as an identity marker, but it doesn't include any typical visual references to the body really at all. Now, first, the artist that's made this next work is Nikita Gale. And this is a portrait of Nikita Gale at the BMW Lounge at Frieze, London. And behind, you can see one of their other artworks, which is a guitar. Nikita often makes instruments. Nikita Gale was born in Alaska and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, like me. I'm not from Alaska, I'm from Georgia. They earned a BA in anthropology from Yale and an MFA in new genres from UCLA. Now based in LA, Nikita specializes in conceptual kinetic installations and sculpture rooted in the history and language and rhythm of music. Nikita's work thinks about what it means to perform and the relationship between performance and labor. The projects also question the mechanisms and materials, visible and invisible, that go into producing the image of performance or even celebrity. Now, this image is the work that Nikita has in the Biennial. It is a looping, time-based installation that consists of a modified player piano with a custom-rigged light system. The title of this piece is all caps, Tempo Rubato, Stolen Time. Now, rubato is a musical term that means the expressive alteration of a rhythm or tempo. It is part of annotated performing practice, which means that you can find it in musical scores like the example I have here. In this slide, the orange arrow points to where the composer has indicated a rubato in the score. And the example I pulled here is an excerpt from a Chopin mazurka. As Gale's title emphasizes, tempo rubato translates from Italian to robbed or stolen time in English. And the logic behind this term is that a rubato is a moment in the score where the performer can deviate from the tempo or rhythm set by the composer, which allows them to steal time. In this dynamic, a performer can either subtly intervene or even make a drastic change to the musical work, depending on their inclination. In the example I'm about to play, the performer speeds up the tempo at the rubato, which makes a subtle but noticeable shift to the larger musical phrase. It gets to feel a little bit rushed. And I'm going to play this clip and wave my hands when it reaches the rubato section. This way you don't need to follow along with the notation to notice the subtle tempo change that feels like a sped up shuffle. So the title of this work, Tempo Rubato, nods to that moment of expressive freedom taken by a performer in relation to a score and acknowledges the space between a musical score and performance. The choice of a player piano for this installation also highlights that space between the score and performance that Nikita is conceptually exploring in different ways throughout this work. For some general reference, a player piano is an instrument that operates automatically using perforated or punched paper rolls, or newer ones will use digital MIDI files, eliminating the need entirely for a human performer. It's a self-playing instrument, and if you've ever seen one, you can see the keys still being depressed without a person there. Originally, player pianos were popular in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, providing a way for affluent but predominantly middle-class families to enjoy music in the home without a keyboardist. Their popularity did sharply decline with the rise of the recording music industry in the early 20th century. Today, you can certainly still find a fair number of player pianos and pianolas in malls, but also haunted houses, attractions, and spaghetti Western sets. And these instruments are often staged self-playing ominously in abandoned rooms with cobwebs, as if a ghostly presence is in there depressing the keys. Now, I think that Nikita leans into the potentially eerie absence of a performer in tempo rubato and takes this association a step further by silencing the instrument with a dampener. So this dampener mutes the piano's ability to play pitched sounds through vibrating strings. So in other words, this leaves the audience with only the sound and image of the instrument's mechanisms, which the artist does amplify a bit through custom-built sound and lighting system. So I'm going to play a clip of the installation playing in this space. So to clarify, the player piano in that clip is programmed to play pre-recorded songs using MIDI input, which is then silenced by a dampener. What you heard wasn't music specifically composed for a modified player piano. Instead, it was existing songs that have been deliberately silenced in a way by the artist. Now, I don't know exactly what songs Nikita loaded into the player piano, but according to museum documents accumulated during the making of this work, the instrument is programmed to play back a series of piano performances by various pop musicians. And these selections, in accordance with the artist's research, are songs with very complex copyright issues. So in making this work, which was one of the new commissions for the Biennial and completed right near the opening, Nikita met with various VPs, a license attorney, and an entertainment attorney at ASCAP, the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers, which is an association that manages the licensing and distribution of royalties for musical works. Nikita worked with lawyers and executives to identify pop songs with complex legal rights, but also find ways to still include or play these songs in their new work. Now, this approach leans into that legal and conceptually fudgy space, overtly navigating the legal boundaries while still fully reperforming some crucial elements of the music. And so this is another video clip of the installation. And this time with that in mind, knowing that the player piano is playing perhaps popular pop songs with complex copyright issues, I think it's worthwhile trying to appreciate and listen again to try to catch what is allowed to shift through with these legal parameters without anything else going. So here's a clip of that. So what do you get? What do you get that is allowed through the system, that slips through the cracks? Well, what you do not get, first off, is a lot of pitched or melodic information. But there is still a lot left. What is allowed under copyright are these diverse percussive sounds that suggest the presence of the body to me, and certainly musical ideas like rhythm, meter, rest, phrasing, and gesture. There are also very legible moments to me where it seems clear that the performer has arrived at the end of a song or is about to enter a dynamic, fast-paced section. And Nikita enhances some of these moments, such as the one captured in this photo with a spotlight on a timer, creating a sense of closure or anticipation, akin to a performer bowing at the end of a concert or stepping onto the stage. All of these elements combined into a performerless performance of several songs asks us to reconsider how musical rights are defined and experienced beyond the traditional norms that are being reinforced and policed by the music legal system. The installation also has a more poetic approach that prompts us to contemplate the role of human presence in musicking, which is a term that means music making. And by highlighting the player piano's operations, yet removing its typical pitched musical output, Nikita questions whether performance can be conveyed solely through mechanical gestures without human agency. I also read this as a very pertinent question about the relation between music and the idea of humanness as a kind of lived experience. Now, the next work is by a collective of artists under the title People Who Stutter Create. And their practice, which is emergent, is also thinking about scores and sounding and phonation, but in a very, very different way. So People Who Stutter Create was founded in 2023 and is a collective of 5 artists who stutter. That is in their bio line. Jia Bin, Delicia Daniels, Jerome Ellis, who also has another work in the Biennial that will be a score he completes in August, I believe, Connor Foran, and Crystal Kubar. Now, these members include a mix of artists, but some of them are also poets, academics, and even speech language pathologists. People Who Stutter Create's inaugural project used the Whitney exhibition billboard space to showcase the creative aspects of disfluency to the public, aiming to challenge and change perceptions about stuttering, which in some cases can lead to lifelong discrimination and stigma. The billboard in this slide is titled "Stuttering Can Create Time." It is installed on the facade at 95 Horatio Street, directly across from the Whitney at the southern end of the High Line. So if you're walking the High Line and getting off where you would go to turn right to the Whitney, the billboard is right directly in front of you. The work features 3 lines of text on a light seafoam green background, and each line of the text highlights and shows how stuttering affects speech differently. Now, I apologize for my poor pronunciation of Spanish and Chinese when I am reading these, but the first line is in Spanish and translates to "Stuttering offers us time" in English. Now, there is a deliberate pause between ofrece and tiempo to show what is called a speech block. So, la tartamudez nos ofrece tiempo. The second line is in Chinese, translating to "People Who Stutter Create Time." The first character in create is replaced to represent stuttering with repeated speech. So, 口齿之 chuang 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 创造之间. So 创造is create. The third line is in English. Stuttering can create time. The S here in stuttering is stretched horizontally to show and remark of a prolonged sound. So I would read this, and there's a fluid interpretation here, as stuttering can create time. The collective describes their artistic intentions behind the work as follows. The collective contends that stuttering, also called stammering, can create room for deep listening and collaboration. Through repeated sounds, prolonged sounds, and blocks with no sound, the group aims to describe social reality while also being able to change it through the act of description. Now, the essence of People Who Stutter Creates Perspective does come to life in this work, where text is manipulated to reflect three aspects of stuttered speech: pauses, repetitions, and elongated sounds. By illustrating these characteristics, the text in the billboard not only represents the challenges individuals who stutter face in communication, but also celebrates the unique rhythm and finds creative potential inherent in stuttering. It also builds a listening sensitivity towards sounds, and the production of sound is a particularly embodied yet necessarily communicative sensation. The next artist I want to look at also thinks about sensitivity, but it's haptics and touch. Dion Lee is a visual artist who works with photography, collage, and video to explore ideas of art and personal history in relation to the American landscape. And despite the grandeur of this subject, many of her works are quite small, or are moving image projections or videos with sound that have an intimate and haptic quality. This image is a work from 2008 titled "A Plot That Also Grounds," and it shows the artist's hands working with the photographic surface as a material, and Dion's hands often make appearances in her work. Dion was born in 1988 in New York, across the street from Central Park in Harlem. She received her MFA from California College of the Arts in Oakland and has taught photography at Stanford and the San Francisco Art Institute in California. She is currently an assistant professor at The Ohio State University. Ancestral resilience, autonomy, and survival, including survival skills like foraging and making fire, are major themes in Dion's landscape works, which engage with the land as a lens to explore these broader complex subjects. This print, which alludes to navigation and cartography, is titled True North. And while Dion does consider herself a landscape photographer working in the canon of landscape photography, she is not as interested in the wide angle views of places that we have come to expect from photographers like Ansel Adams or Carlton Watkins. According to Dion, my work and research are driven by the histories and energies of a place, processing the memory of the land itself. I often say it is important for me to be close to the ground. To me, being close to the ground means that you are really able to hold and wrestle with complicated truths because you're right up against a surface. This philosophy is evident in Challenger Deep from 2019, which is on view in the Biennial. It is a black and white single channel video without sound that loops at around 20 minutes. And as you can see in this photo, Challenger Deep is the only work in this very spacious gallery room, which has high ceilings that are out of the crop of this photo and features floor-to-ceiling windows along one entire wall. It may be hard to tell from this image, but the video is projected. It's not displayed on a monitor. And the transparency of the projection, along with all of the openness of the gallery space, does create a very airy atmosphere when you encounter this work in the exhibition, if you get the chance to do so. Now, the video itself was shot very low to the ground. The framing brings the viewer intimately close to this surface and allows one to engage directly with the intricate details of the landscape. It's also a very tactile way of framing the land. The sense of touch and the idea of touch as a skill, like you've got the touch, are important to this work, as you can already see in this clip. So this is an excerpt of Challenger Deep. Okay. So what we just watched was Dion wandering a field in search of groundwater. She is water dowsing or water witching, which is a method used to search for groundwater in preparation for drilling a well. Water dowsing is an old kind of magical practice which can be traced back to antiquity. Today, it is widely considered pseudoscientific, but in some modern contexts, it is taken quite seriously. The practice of water dowsing involves using metal rods or other divination tools as instruments, which are psychically charged to indicate the presence of groundwater. The rods are supposed to cross, like in this image here, when groundwater is detected. Dion made this work when she moved to California to teach, when there was a severe drought going on. She was thinking about the paradox of groundwater drying up below the Earth's surface, juxtaposed against rising oceans encroaching upwards on our shores. In discussing Challenger Deep, she also thinks about the impracticality of relying on dowsing instruments during an emergency. If faced with a dire situation and you really needed water, would anyone realistically take the time to psychically charge up the dowsing rods and get into some water witching? When in survival mode, can anyone maintain the level of composure needed for such an activity? When discussing this aspect of the work and her specific choice of the dowsing rods, Dion says that it really points to the fact that survival comes from this marriage of practical knowledge and faith in something that's more unknowable or unseen. To use these rods as they were intended involves a belief in something unseen and their ability to sense water underground. In the context of survival as a broad subject in Dion's work, and as the narrowed reality of the drought in California that was going on when she made the video, the rods illustrate an intertwining of practical knowledge, which could be understanding the landscape or hydrology, with faith in the instrument's ability to sense that water. This marriage between tangible skills and intangible belief systems suggests that survival often requires a blend of rational understanding and trust in methods that may or may not have empirical validation. This work also makes me consider about the ways in which we explore, not just seeking answers, but the experience of the search itself, that experiential quality. This interest is reinforced by the title of the work, Challenger Deep, named after the deepest known point of the Earth's seabed, which is a place that remains unexplored and where no one has ventured yet. So the last work that I'm going to discuss, and certainly not least, also considers the idea of touch at a distance and explores both connected and disconnected concepts of haptics and touch. And it has a very different approach to sensations that are beyond the visible and is particularly interested in waves. Before getting to that work, I want to provide brief bio of the artist. So the last artist I will be discussing in this talk is Constantina Zavitsanos. Constantina, or Tina, was born and educated in Pennsylvania at Millersville University and the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, which as of this year has ceased offering degree programs. Tina currently lives in New York and teaches at the New School. In 2021, they were a Keith Haring Fellow at the Center for Curatorial Studies at Bard. So the work I was talking about is a complex installation which has its entire room in the Biennial, which is a pairing of two works, an infrasonic ramp titled Call to Post, which is paired with a piece of dual overlapping text projections titled All the Time. In this photograph, you can see the ramp in the middle and the caption work, which is the projections, is on the left side of the room. Now, there are several components to this installation, which I'll try to break down some of the main ones and make sense of, which kind of reflects the artist's very expansive approach to making. But one important overarching topic that I want to foreground that connects to Tina's overall practice is an idea of inherent instead of additive accessibility. Tina's practice deeply reflects their perspective as part of the disability community, both as a care provider and as a recipient. Often drawing from lived experience and critical moments of self-reflection, Tina's work goes against the grain of mainstream thinking about accessibility, provoking audiences to consider how inclusion is not just a pragmatic concern, but an entrenched aesthetic choice and cultural tradition that needs to be maintained continuously. To counter this, accessibility is a core part of the artist's creative process and aesthetics from the outset of any given project. It is integral rather than an afterthought. And this is the artist speaking about this. I'm thinking of access as a material, a primary material in the work, not added after the work. Nobody wants inclusion that is just the site of a long-going exclusion. So for a little clarification about the aesthetic dynamics in play here and what they're discussing, Tina's additive view contrasts practices, even well-intentioned gestures, that approach accessibility as additive. For example, a wheelchair ramp that is added after the building is built, or closed captioning that is tacked on after a film is in post-production. So the primary sculptural, which is also architectural form in Call to Post, is a ramp that Tina built in accordance with ADA standards. It has a gradual slope, sufficient width, level landings, and clearances to accommodate safe and comfortable passage for chair users. It doesn't need a ramp added onto it to be accessible. It's an inherently accessible art object. The artist also calls this ramp a kind of instrument, and specifically an instrument that sculpts a sculpture made of waves. So in the artist's words, what's important about this work, Call to Post, is that it's sculptures made of waves, particular kinds of waves made at particular thresholds of human sensing. So the last points I'm going to discuss are what kind of waves are being sculpted, and there are two main kinds. And also I'm going to provide a little context about what they're thinking about regarding thresholds of human sensing. And then I'll try to wrap it up and provide some reflections about how this boundary zone is being engaged by Tina. This image on the screen is an installation view of the first version of Call to Post, so the purple ramp image, and it's from 2019. And in this early version, the room is red, which played an important role for two reasons. First, thematically, there are associations between red light and love hotels. And one reference for the ramp that I couldn't leave out is those vibrating coin-operated beds in motels known as magic fingers or magic finger beds. And they were very popular from the 1950s to the 1970s, mainly in motels and hotels across the US. And here the tagline is, "Magic Fingers quickly carries you into the land of tingling, relaxation, and ease." And there is that therapeutic aspect of the ramp. Another reason that red is important is the physical location of red in the visible color spectrum, which is a part of the threshold of sensation that Tina is thinking about. When discussing this work, Tina explains that they were not conceptualizing the color red as a shade or hue, or even something with a mood association like anger. They're emphasizing that specific colors correspond to specific frequencies of light. So this chart that I found here gives a broad overview of this view. It's a chart of the electromagnetic spectrum, and I picked this rendering, which is an old NASA educational graphic, because it clearly illustrates how proportionally diminutive the typical range of human vision for sighted people is in relation to the much broader gamut of actually existing frequencies. That little slice of rainbow in the middle denotes the possible range of visible light for sighted people. Here, what is often called red is associated with the lowest frequency of visible light in that rainbow. Anything falling outside of this threshold is considered invisible. Conversely, the colors or frequencies labeled violet and blue represent the higher end of the spectrum. Beyond this lies ultraviolet light, which is invisible to humans, but bees and other animals can perceive this. The newer iteration of Call to Post that is included in the Biennial is violet. So this engages that higher end of the spectrum. But in both versions, Tina is working with waves of colored light and with a sculptural attitude that's locating them as physical objects on the boundary between human potential visibility and invisibility. I wanted to play right at that threshold of where images dip in and out of sighted vision, and to kind of privilege images that have that kind of slippage. So that's the artist reflecting on the light part of this work. Now, the second kind of waves that Tina is using as a material are sound waves that are being modulated or sculpted through the infrasonic ramp. So this ramp, this instrument, contains 6 transducers concealed within or underneath the ramp. The transducers in this work are different from more familiar audio equipment like loudspeakers. They can move or literally push very low sound vibrations down to 5 hertz in some cases, which is beyond the range of human hearing, commonly cited as a gamut between 20 hertz and 20,000 hertz. So what Tina's instrument does is take sounds that exist within the typical range of human audition and pushes them down beyond the range of human hearing, where they become a different kind of wave, infrasonic or infrasonic waves. Humans cannot hear infrasonic waves, but they can be felt haptically through vibrations and sensations through the body. And this is what Tina's ramp invites you to experience and feel. So this is a video clip of the installation room, and you could see people and visitors encountering the ramp in different ways. Now, what's being felt are vibrations from 2 lines of poetry that Tina is speaking, which are the projections in the first work. These lines, which I have actually transcribed, and I can read selections from them if somebody wants in the Q&A, are basically metaphysical love poems that talk about the impossibility of connection. And so the relation between these projections and the work is that the artist is reciting these lines of poetry, and that's the sound. Those are the sound waves that the infrasonic ramp is pushing outside of audition into haptic felt vibrations. Now, this is a view of projection that I shot with the iPad. So to conclude, I do want to address the title of the ramp, which is call to post, which is a term taken from gambling and horse racing. In horse racing, the call to post is the signal for horses and jockeys to move from the paddock to the racetrack, usually accompanied by a bugle call signaling the imminent start of the race. So spectators and potential bettors use this moment to get a final look at the horses before the race starts, adding to the excitement of the event. In Tina's piece, the audience is called to post. They're invited to approach and spend time on the ramp, experiencing these poems through vibrations, and also thinking about the atmospheric colored light as a sensation of waves. But there's also something else important going on in Tina's decision to take the poems out of the audible range and push them out into infrasonics, which is a bit more complex and I think provocative, given the artist's attention to the politics and aesthetics of accessibility. And I'm going to play a clip of the artist speaking about some of their intentions from a lecture at Barnard and hear what they have to say. And then I'm going to conclude and we can open up some questions.
Because it made me think, I was like, well, you know, now that some of the non-disabled art world wants to like start adding access, they want to add access, but it doesn't necessarily feel like they really want to, like, you know, get with this. Well, I won't say that because some people are, but some of them, you know, don't feel like they're trying to get with the people, with the disabled people. They just want to like have this like afterthought addendum of access. And I was like, well, why don't I just remove all that access, which has the result not of being inaccessible, but of actually being accessible.
So this gesture and this actual sculpting of waves, taking them from being listenable and pushing them to be inaccessible, Tina is suggesting that by removing access to something, the result is actually not that it becomes inaccessible, but rather that it becomes accessible otherwise. And in cultural situations where ableism and mentalism are thinking about loss and fear, like you're missing out on something, this gesture that it just becomes something otherwise is quite poetic and strong. So that is the last of 5 works. Thank you for following along. There's time for a few questions if anyone has any, and I would love to try to answer if I can.